Hello, and welcome back to Voices of the Great War. I'm Liz Watson. Today we're going to be reading another few letters from the Brown family, and if we remember, Edward Brown, he is a soldier stationed in France during World War I, and he is writing these letters home to his brother William, who lives in Maryland. So our first letter from Edward is actually dated January 2nd. It says 1917, but he meant 1918, and I think, that transition from the prior year to the next year, it got them even back then. So the letter that Edward wrote to his brother William reads, "Dear brother, I wrote Mother a letter yesterday, it being my first opportunity. We hiked 3 days, then we had some snow. Why, we look like regular snowmen, just covered from head to foot. It was awfully cold. The water in our canteens was actually freezing. I'm feeling fine and dandy, however. I wish I could go into detail and describe some of the things I have seen and some of the experiences I have had, but censorship prohibits me from doing so. We will try to drop you a longer letter in a few days. Trusting this finds you and the family enjoying dandy health, and with my best regards, your brother, Edward Brown, 42nd Division, 167th Infantry, AEF." So that's Edward's first letter, and from that we learn he has been doing some hiking. Again, there's the mention of censorship, so he can't really say what he's seen and done other than hiking. But the soldiers did a lot of hiking during that time to get where they were going. And it is interesting, though, hearing about how cold it is and how the water in his canteen was actually freezing. It must have been some brutal conditions for those poor boys, having to hike through that kind of chilly weather. So our next letter from Edward was written a few days later, and it is actually dated. It's 4 pages long, and it was dated January 7th. He's still saying 1917. Again, we're still, those first few days of the new year, it's always hard to remember to write that new year down. But this is that letter that Edward wrote. We can see the YMCA stationery. And Edward's letter to his brother William reads, "My dear brother, your letter of the 3rd of November was received, and I certainly was glad to hear from you. Have been waiting patiently for the letters from home, and am glad that everyone is well. Let me hear from you at every opportunity. The card also arrived today, and it surely was an appropriate and pretty one. I have written you and Mother numerous letters, and no doubt you have received many of them by this time. I'll try to write at least 2 times a week. Mail is very slow, and please tell her not to worry, as no news is generally good news. I'm feeling generally good, and fine and dandy, in fact, better than I've ever felt before. The past week has been clear and cold. We appreciate old Sal now more than ever we did before. I was surprised upon dressing this morning to find it considerably warmer and to see the snow melting so fast. It rained practically all night and today. I visited an old fort Sunday that was built years ago. It is an exact type of old architecture of which we studied so much. There is a huge wall which completely surrounds the fort, and it is wonderful how well built the thing is. The inner or center of the fort can only be gotten to by using a drawbridge and going through a huge front gate. The fort covers the top of a big hill from which you can see for miles and miles. The scenery is beautiful. You can get plenty of your old sport out here. The canal is frozen, and it is possible for one to skate 20 miles or more. Wouldn't you like to take a skate upon a course like that? As of yet, I haven't received the boxes, but am expecting them at any time. The post office, I understand, is jammed full of packages. I hope they are packed in wooden boxes, as they go through lots of handling. I received a box from the people of Tulsa last week, which contained 5 boxes of gum, 2 boxes of assorted candy, and a few other things. They sent every boy a box, and I cannot say in words how I appreciate mine. They certainly have been good to us. I am so sorry to hear of Florence going through another operation. Both of you have had some mighty hard things to go through. I pray that this year will start you both on a new era of health. Give Florence and the children my sincerest regards, and tell them that I love to see them. It has been some time since I last saw them. In regards to Settle, I received a letter from him recently stating he had put my cotton money in the bank and it will take care of taxes, insurance, etc., and leave a balance to my credit. However, if you will keep in touch with him and take care of my interests while I'm away, it will be deeply appreciated. I am fully glad to hear of the splendid success you are having. May you land many more big orders. Well, brother, I must close trusting this finds you feeling very much better, and with my sincerest regards to all. Love your brother, Edward H. Brown, 167th Infantry, 42nd Division, AEF. So in that letter, we do get to see that Edward has had some chances to go exploring around the countryside. He did get to see a big fort and some of the amazing architecture that Europe has to offer that people from the American side, just we don't get to see that kind of architecture. Obviously, we don't have anything built quite that old. So it is probably very like it was for Odo from the Ecker family when he went over there. It was probably a wonderful eye-opening experience as far as the architecture goes. Now, going back to the hiking, we talked a little bit in the first letter. You mentioned the hiking, Edward did. And so I have something very interesting. So what these are actually notes that were taken by another soldier, not Edward, but this particular soldier, G.L. Simpson. He went to the School of Military Aeronautics at Princeton University, Princeton, New Jersey. And that's where he was during at least part of World War I. And he took some interesting notes that I'm going to actually read to you regarding hygiene and hiking and that sort of thing. And these are some of the notes that he took during that time when he was in that course, and they're all written in pencil. So again, I've kind of recorded them just to make them a little bit easier to read. So the first line talks about military hygiene. Many problems of health solved by the Board of Health and Civil Life, we must solve many of these problems ourselves in the service. Modern war is impossible without modern preventative medicine and sanitation. Primary object is prevention. Weed out the physically unfit. And then it goes on to talk about care of the feet. At first sight of pain, a 10-yard roll of 2-inch adhesive tape. Put a piece of adhesive over the irritated surface, dry skin thoroughly. Blister. If you have a blister, drain off serum with a needle, paint with iodine, and put on adhesive plaster. If you have an ulcer, consult the surgeon, clean with alcohol, apply iodine, sterile gauze, then add adhesive plaster. More about the feet. Keep feet healthy. Wash in hot and then cold water, dry especially between the toes. Use a little alcohol. Now we go on to socks. Now, the reason they focus a lot on the feet is they really were, the feet were so important, healthy feet were so important to the boys during the war, because they did so much hiking, and that was one of the main means of transportation from point A to point B was hiking. So you really, really had to take care of your feet, and it really wasn't a joke. If they had ulcers, if they had blisters, it could pull them off the line, and it could lead to, unfortunately, it could even lead to gangrene, obviously infections that would require amputation, just because of all that hiking that they did, and not in the greatest conditions. I mean, if they were hiking through mud, if it was just raining and raining and raining, and they never could keep their feet dry, yes, those types of issues could lead to a catastrophe for the boys regarding their feet. That's why foot care was so essential, and why it was just kind of drilled into the boys, take care of your feet, take care of your feet. And then the instructions go on to discuss socks. Socks. 2 pair of socks worn by infantry. Woolen socks must fit properly. Socks washed and hung up to dry every night. Next morning, wear the other clean pair. 3rd day, wear the first pair, so you're kind of rotating through your socks. So you're always trying to wear a clean, dry pair of socks. And absolutely no colored socks. Because if you did have breakdown on your feet, and it's like an ulcer, and your feet were sweating, and then the sweating caused the color of those socks to run or bleed, it could, lead to a much worse infection. So that's why no colored socks. Then we talk about boots. Boots. Infantry feet are measured 1 size larger and 1 size wider than in civilian life. So that means that when they had their boots ordered, they had to order just a bigger boot than what they were normally used to. Speaking of boots, I do have, now these would not be just a regular soldier's boots, these would be kind of an officer's boots, but I do have a pair of boots from World War I, and we can see they're long, they would go up the entire calf, and they're kind of nice, sturdy leather material, and then we can see the sole of the boot. See how sturdy that sole is. And we can see it's been well worn there, so this boot I think this boot saw a lot of action, but this is that boot. But yes, a size larger and wider. Then they go on to discuss the toenails. Not quite to the edge of the toe, calluses shorn off with safety razors. Now we're going to go on to a different subject. We're going to talk about first aid packets. So first aid packet, contents. First aid dressing worn on belt for your own use. So I actually do have a belt, speaking of the belt. So this is the belt that the boys would wear around their waists. And you can see it does have multiple different pockets here for different things. Probably for the, for bullets rather. But it also has, we also see here is where we would keep that gauze. And so it would open up, and still tucked within that pocket is, it's stuck in there a little bit, but that gauze that was issued. And there is some writing on there, but it is quite faded and difficult to see. But so this gauze, that would be issued to the boys, and if they would need it, they would have to go ahead and use that gauze. And then we go on to talk about tourniquets. Tourniquet, put on to stop bleeding. It can be made of a towel, a handkerchief. Twist slowly until bleeding stops, but no tighter. In a position that the patient can release it if need be. Then we go on to talk about our canteens. And the letter, Edward was mentioning how the water in his canteen kept freezing during their hike. So our canteens must have a canvas cover. Wet the canvas cover. The evaporation will keep the water cool. Contents, minimum that a man would need for a march, and that water needs to be for your own use. So in other words, don't fill up your canteen too much, because when they're marching for those long distances, every ounce of weight is just another ounce of weight, and you don't want to be overburdened by weight that's not necessary. So that's, in other words, be careful about how much you fill your canteen. And another interesting thing about filling of the canteen, so we talk about, or in that instruction, it talks about only putting as much water in your canteen as you would need for a march. However, which would create sloshing about if you did not fill it all the way. So if you were in an area where there were enemy soldiers, you would not want to have that sloshing, so you would not want to half-fold canteen if you were in the area where enemy soldiers were, again, because that sloshing could give you away. So different circumstances there. But if you're hiking, only fill with as much water as you would need for the journey. And we can see we do have on our canteen, we have that canvas covering, and it said, fill or kind of wet this canvas covering, and that would help keep the water inside cool, of course. And Edward's letter, I don't think he had any trouble keeping that water inside cool. And then we can see the cap would just screw off, and then the boys would be able to drink their water. So this is a canteen. It has the belt, so the boys would also wear this, around their waist. So they could have, when you think about all the equipment that they had, they had their weapons, they had their ammo, which they would also store obviously in the pockets of, this belt here, and their gauze. They had their rifles. They had, whatever rations they had along with them. So and their changes of socks and their toiletries. And so they did have quite a few things to take with them on these long hikes. So again, that's why they really talk about in those instructions to kind of, pay attention to how much, even as much water as you put in your canteen, you want to keep that minimal amount. So it's interesting when we discuss all those little kind of idiosyncrasies that you don't even really think about. And that is our series or episode for today. And thank you for joining me. I am Liz Watson, and this was Voices of the Great War. And until next time.